Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Niche Cast. It's your boy Diggity Doo Dado, the Pep Toy Panther, Mr. Slippers, here for another episode of the Niche Cast with the Wobbly Wildcard, where we scour the Aotearoa sporting landscape for our standard selection of just funkadelic yarns that we like to spin. If you enjoy what we're doing at the Niche Cache and the Niche Cast, jump on Patreon and help us reach a goal of 50 patrons. I think we got 29 at the moment, so we're just gunning for 50 patrons. Otherwise, having your eardrums tuned in, your taringas tuned into the Niche Cast is good enough for us. And chuck it up to the Wobbly Wildcard right now, who... I'm not sure how many UFC fights you have watched, Wildcard, but you had the unfortunate instance of making the effort to tune in to see Israel Adesanya versus Yoel Romero. And question A, how are you? B, how do you feel about that decision to make an effort to tune in loosely to seeing Yoel Romero do nothing against Israel Adesanya?
Well, question A, sort of same old, yeah, not too bad. A little bit bloody tired, been stretching the old waking hours the last couple of days, keeping up with everything. I had a Sunday, I was going to say Sunday afternoon because that's when the fight was, but it was the entire day. I watched Chris Wood's game at 6:30 in the morning, watched the Footy Ferns at 10 a.m., and I suspect we'll talk more about them later on in the week after they finish their Algarve Cup stuff. Then watched a Premiership game at 2 p.m, which was Eastern Suburbs against Hawke's Bay, and then at 6 p.m, the Wellington Phoenix were on. The next morning I also got up at 5:30 to watch the Manchester Derby, so that's like 5 games of football in the space of about 25 hours. It was absolutely glorious, but... in the middle of that, yeah, I did tune in to watch the Adesanya fight. When I say tune in, I mean like I had it on my phone on a less than legal stream as I was watching the second half of the Phoenix, which itself was getting a little bit boring because the Phoenix weren't playing great, but also looked like they were probably cruising to a win. So, sort of thought, well, I might as well catch the old UFC. We've been doing some good build-ups for. So, we've got a pretty good balance going with the old combat sports where you're the UFC guy and I'm the boxing guy, and that covers Adesanya and all the city kickboxing guys and all that, and I then get to write about Joseph Parker every now and then, and hopefully Junior Farr will be more prominent down the line. But I don't think I've ever watched a full UFC fight, like start to finish. I've tuned in for bits and pieces. I've watched highlights. I've followed build-up and background interviews and stuff like that. I've never sat there and watched the entire thing all the way through. So 90 seconds into that fight, and literally not a single punch would be thrown, and I'm sitting there being like, "Is this what it's normally like? Is this normal? Have I just tuned in at a bad time?" It turns out I just tuned in at a bad time because everyone, even the bloody... that's another thing which I was like afterwards, is this normal? Bloody old Dana White, head honcho of the UFC, is ripping on the quality of the fight himself. I'm like, is that normal too? That's pretty bloody weird even of itself.
And well deserved. We'll get into the nitty and gritty of that fight. It's just it was just funny that you made the effort to tune in, and as it panned out, that fight was on the surface rather horrible from our Kiwi UFC angle that we'll explore later on. Rather interesting just thinking about Israel Adesanya and how he operated in that fight, and just I was literally... in the first round, I was laughing at what Yoel Romero was doing. It was funny. It was weird. It was just a unique scenario. We've also got on this agenda, we got the Black Caps are about to start an ODI series against Australia in a couple of days. So we'll just touch loosely on that. The White Ferns finished their T20 World Cup rather disappointingly. Got some words on that as well. Wildcard's going to have his usual Flying Kiwis wrap up from the weekend. And this is the last week leading into the start of another NRL season, and I just wrote about the Warriors' expectations. So before we get the team list that drop on Tuesday night, we'll just have a brief little corridor about Warriors and the expectations. But late last week, wildcard, there was a bit of a bombshell in the NBA, and we both follow the NBA quite closely. But when there are NBA matters that involve one of the bros, Steven Adams or Sean Marks, we fire up because they're both very interesting characters. And we talked about Sean Marks at various points over the last 6 to 7 months. And while Steven Adams is a very interesting character in a very interesting situation, Sean Marks is also far out. He is in a very interesting situation himself. So late last week, there was news that the Brooklyn Nets had parted ways with coach Kenny Atkinson. Kenny Atkinson's done a great job with Sean Marks and building the Brooklyn Nets up, and that's very important because when we're looking at Aotearoa's contribution to the NBA, we've got Steven Adams performing at a high level in a team that wasn't meant to be in the position that the Oklahoma City Thunder are now in. Steven Adams he's shining. He's living his best life, shining that light nice and bright for Aotearoa in the NBA. And then the rebuild of the Brooklyn Nets, Sean Marks played a huge role in that. So we've had very strong contributions to the NBA from Aotearoa. And now we've just got another weird situation. A lot of weird situations around at the moment, wildcard, where Kenny Atkinson is no longer the coach. And the way I'm reading this is that no one wants to say it. And you're looking around the NBA media stuff, everyone's like kind of beating around this bush. But there was obviously, I think the way I'm reading it is that there was some sort of friction between, and by friction I just mean like it wasn't going to work out as well as it had done for the Nets previously, with Kenny Atkinson coaching an eager group of NBA battlers who are, just overperforming their expectations. There seemed to be some sort of friction or niggle between Kenny Atkinson and the new arrivals at the Brooklyn Nets, the guys like Kyrie Irving, guys like Kevin Durant, and so on and so forth. And apparently the job became untenable through somehow that. How are you reading that situation? I'm definitely of the belief that Atkinson didn't really want to partake in the direction that the Brooklyn Nets were going in, considering that they were a fantastic team and organization that had a bit of a Kiwi DNA prior to some free agency activity. How are you reading that situation? What interests you about it? And
yeah, I was caught completely just on the wrong foot by this one. I did not see it coming whatsoever. I know they've had some sort of they've had a tricky time of it, because when you think about what the team was last year when they made it to the playoffs with a team of guys who were just sort of salvaged from weird positions, like some sort of outside lottery draft picks that they've invested in, some guys who had injuries or just been underappreciated in other roles at other teams, and they'd given them a chance sort of later on in their careers than what you normally get that sort of breakthrough. I'm thinking of a guy like Spencer Dinwiddie there, Karis LeVert, Jared Allen, their big center fella that I think he's the highest whatever numbered, whatever, I don't know how the thing works, drafted player that they have taken so far under Sean Marks, and just some good veterans and things, and they just had the best team culture, and they punched well above their weight and were a really interesting, fun team to watch. Nice modern style to them, and Kenny Atkinson deserves so much credit for what he did there. Then, of course, there's the big shift in everything, with big seismic activity of signing a couple superstar players, and then that obviously had to change everything. Sean Marks has said all along, there's an adjustment to be made. We can't just expect them to come in. Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, they also brought along their buddy DeAndre Jordan for no particular reason other than they just seemed to like him and he was willing. which if you're Sean Marks and that's the difference between getting Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, then sure, you say whatever, we'll give a couple years to DeAndre Jordan. I thought it was pretty notable that the very first game without Kenny Atkinson in charge, suddenly Jared Allen's on the bench and DeAndre Jordan's starting. So that certainly added some fuel to the fire as well. But it's just that clash between like the way they were doing it and the way they had to do it in the future. Yeah, Sean Marks always saying all along we can't expect them to adapt completely to us. Just like they can't expect us to adapt completely to them. Like, we got to find a middle ground. We got to make this work some other way. And we accept that we had a fun, interesting team, but we weren't a team that was going to challenge for titles. We need this to go to the next level. And it seems Kenny Atkinson has just kind of suffered from this. And I haven't really had enough time to dig into it fully because I've been doing all my football writing. Hopefully today or tomorrow I will be able to really crack into it and write something more substantive about what's going on here. But at the moment, I've only just got what I've read from a couple articles and a whole bunch of tweets. So I guess the main point from this whole thing is that Kenny Atkinson has been like the fall guy of that that molding between the way things were done and the way things will be done. And it's a weird one because, man, like NBA Twitter really fired up over this, because it's just another example to dig into Kyrie Irving, because it seems like the obvious target. He's been known to cause friction here or there. I think that's a bit, I don't know. I always want to defend Kyrie Irving because I'm sure like it just feels like a pile-on when things get to that point, but this doesn't look great for him, to be honest. I mean, like, Kevin Durant hasn't even played for them. He's out for the entirety of the season. Kyrie Irving has missed, I think, more games than he's played. So it's a bit weird to think of this from a coaching perspective. I suspect something you sort of hinted at there, which is that I think this was, like, I've heard obviously the idea about the player power sort of pushing him out, that kind of thing. I've heard that there were, like, Sean Marks did a press conference, which I haven't heard the whole thing of, but I know he said, like, there was a big discussion between him, the owner, and Kenny Atkinson, which suggests that the players weren't involved in that at all. I think there's obviously a middle ground, which is more likely the reality, but I've seen it said that the owner made the call that he has to fire him. My first thought, actually, when I saw what happened was that was a thought about Sean Marks and the hierarchy in the NBA, because it's always been, I've tried to treat it this way when I've written about it, as a partnership between Marks and Atkinson, Marks covering the off-court, Atkinson covering the on-court, but then you realize when Kenny Atkinson gets fired that there is actually a hierarchy here, and the general manager comes in ahead of the coach. Kenny Atkinson maybe just learnt that, but I suspect also, I mean, obviously the hierarchy goes even further because the owner comes in ahead of the GM as well. The owner is the guy who has the power to fire Sean Marks, although obviously no reason to do that. I suspect, and I don't know enough to, this might be completely wrong, I don't know enough to be confident in saying this, but I kind of suspect that I think this had a lot to do with Kenny Atkinson not particularly wanting to be a part of the next thing. And if you want to go like ultimate conspiracy theory, my ultimate conspiracy theory about this is maybe, just maybe, someone like Greg Popovich might be thinking of retiring and Kenny Atkinson might be lining up for that job next time, because it just seems like obviously Sean Marks got the Spursy connection. Kenny Atkinson seems like someone who would fit in perfectly to that whole system, but that's just me with my head in the clouds there. I suspect maybe, yeah, Kenny Atkinson, it's easy to say player power, they forced him out, they didn't like the way things were done, they had to adapt and he wasn't willing to, whatever. I suspect that Kenny Atkinson had an equal part in also wanting to either pursue other options, because for damn sure he's getting another head coaching job pretty soon. Like, he's got especially for like a rebuilding team, he's the first guy you should be looking at, because he's done it already. He's done with fewer resources than anyone else has. He's rebuilt a team as a head coach. So, like, his stocks are not damaged by this whatsoever, especially when people are just, especially fans, automatically going to just blame the player powers aspect of this. But yeah, I suspect Kenny Atkinson maybe chose, like, not pushed, didn't jump or anything. I think he just turned and walked away.
So there are some reports, primarily from Shams Charania, who is pretty much second to Woj in terms of like NBA insider stuff. that Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant were vocal at certain points about the culture of the Brooklyn Nets, which is a bit weird. There was a contentious team meeting, and Kevin Durant paraphrasingly said that the Nets must improve their habits and that they were not building the proper culture traits necessary for a title contender. There's also stuff about DeAndre Jordan not starting and so on and so forth. It seems like I would go along your thinking of Kenny Atkinson wanting to get the fuck out of there. Like, why would you not? Because I think there's some bad karma coming the Brooklyn Nets way. But I think it started from the stuff we're hearing about Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. And then, like you said, I think Kenny Atkinson could possibly see what was happening and what was going to happen, and that he didn't want to be a part of it, which is good to him. Much of the reporting, though, is all about the player power. So you're all getting like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving did this and did that, and created this and created that to get Kenny Atkinson out. But like that's just how Americans like to report on the NBA. They don't necessarily like the juicy angle of Kenny Atkinson not wanting to deal with those dudes.
The more complicated angles of everyone having a little bit of a stake and a little bit of a say, and it being a complicated situation kind of thing.
Yeah, so I'm definitely of the opinion...
Americans don't do complicated.
No, they don't. I'm definitely of the opinion that I just have this vibe that things are not going to work out for the Brooklyn Nets. I'm fascinated to see how it plays out. I'm fascinated to see what the end result is as far as the Brooklyn Nets and their level of competition in the coming seasons. I think it's going to work out in favor of Kenny Atkinson a whole lot more than it's going to work out in the favor of the Brooklyn Nets. And I can see a situation where all the players, or a lot of the players that the Brooklyn Nets developed to get them to this point with Kenny Atkinson, they may wish to pursue other opportunities if they don't feel like the vibe that they once had is going to continue, because you bring in Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, everything changes. But to narrow it down, we are a Kiwi podcast, so we got to put the focus on Sean Marks. He's in an awkward spot. Like, the team that he has created has completely changed. They went from that battler, hardworking, overperforming kind of group that took care of the basics, and with a click of the fingers, they went to the complete, American star-driven NBA franchise. But there was still like a DNA that was the battler Brooklyn Nets overachieving kind of thing. Now, I think there's a clear cut from the two versions of the Brooklyn Nets. Like, maybe to this point, under Sean Marks, he had done well to, integrate the two different elements of the Brooklyn Nets. But at this point, I think Sean Marks is now dealing with a standard star heavy team. And I'm very interested to see how it works out for Sean Marks, because I would just prefer it if he just followed Kenny Atkinson and got the fuck out of there at some point. You know what I'm saying? Like, maybe him and Atkinson go join the Spurs, because old mate R.C. Buford's of the older variety as well. But that's down the track. But yeah, just interested to see how Sean Marks now juggles and deals with this rather fascinating situation in the Brooklyn Nets.
Yeah, but that's all true. That's all completely true. But devil's advocate here, the culture has completely changed for sure, but that's not really Sean Marks' problem. That was Kenny Atkinson's problem, and Kenny Atkinson has left, and with Kenny Atkinson leaving, that takes away a lot of the conflict, and Sean Marks can roll with that. Sean Marks is the general manager. He can, he's already pivoted by signing a couple superstars, and that's the only way to do it in the NBA. When was the last time a team won an NBA championship without at least one, if not two, superstar players in their team? It's never been done. This is the only way you're going to play for the play for titles and play for rings and all that. He he's the general manager. He can now just general managery type moves. He can pivot that quickly. It's not like he doesn't have to bear the brunt of it because Kenny Atkinson has already done that. So I don't know. I think Sean Marks is in a good position in a way, and he's also got a lot of players whose trade value are a lot higher because of Kenny Atkinson. And I think of a guy like Karis LeVert, who just scored 51 points the other day. Like, is he good enough to be your third option on a championship team? I suspect it's not impossible that he might well become that one day, pretty soon. Like once Kevin Durant's back and you're able to juggle those things, hopefully a fit Kyrie Irving as well next season, Karis LeVert becomes your third option. How good's that team? Well, maybe we'll get to find out. Or if we don't, like Kyrie Irving had that famous interview, or rather infamous interview earlier in the season where he started like naming names and talking about how they need to add 1 or 2 or 3 players to the group to really bring them up to like championship caliber. And that was pretty tactless from Kyrie Irving, and I think he did apologize for that. He apologized for naming like teammates, because if you start naming some teammates, you don't name them all, and then it sounds like you're like making divisions in the locker room kind of thing. But he knows what it takes to win championships. He's not wrong. Kevin Durant knows what it takes to win championships. He's like, and whereas Kyrie Irving's a he's a weirdo. He's a bit of a rogue. He's a bit of a like loose cannon type fella. Kevin Durant isn't. And when Kevin Durant was the villain, especially to OKC fans, it was because he chose to be the villain. It was because he decided he was sick of being the guy who wears his backpack to training and the nicest guy in the NBA. He wanted to make a bit of a heel turn, and he did. He went to the Golden State Warriors. He pissed off some people there as well. Didn't get on great with Draymond Green, but Kevin Durant knows what it takes to win championships, and what it takes to be the Kenny Atkinson coached battlers punching above their weight is not the same thing. And I could certainly, but like, it seems like it goes against the culture to say that they didn't have the right habits of Kevin Durant saying things like that, if that's all reported correctly. But I believe that. I can see how that would be the case. Like, there's a different, there's a level of accountability that comes with being a team that's expected to win versus a team that's winning when they're not expected to, because that team can just be like, you can have off days and no one really cares. You can win as many games as you lose in the Eastern Conference and probably sneak in pretty close to the playoffs at like an even 41-41 record. I'm not sure what they won last year. I'm sure it was about 42 or 43 games, so not much above 500. Made the playoffs, everyone loved them. But that's like, if the Los Angeles Lakers or the LA Clippers this season were winning 43, 44 games, something like that, they're going to be absolutely slayed in the media, because expectations, accountability, these things, like, there are no off days. You can't, like, LeBron James can't just be phoning it in well, maybe LeBron can, because he's LeBron James. And a phoned-in LeBron James is probably still going to pick up a nice, easy 15, 10, and 8 or something like that. But top-level championship teams have to be on it pretty much every night. You got to be winning 3 out of every 4 games kind of thing. Like, that's very different, and a lot of those players probably had a bit of a shock to the system, and having these guys come in signaling a big turn in the franchise, and then being left like, just also in the same way as Kenny Atkinson was stuck in that changing of that sort of changing of the times. A lot of those players were probably caught between that as well, where suddenly like they're being driven a bit harder, because it's one thing to punch above your weight, but then once you're expected to maintain that, that's a lot of pressure, and those guys had never felt pressure because they weren't expected to do anything before. So I can see how that goes, and I think Sean Marks has got, you consider what he had when he first turned up to the team, trying to rebuild a franchise with basically nothing to work with. He had like Brook Lopez's contract, and that was about it. And now you look at what he's got, all these young, impressive, tradable players. Like, I wouldn't want them to trade Jared Allen, because I really like Jared Allen. I think he's a great player, and I think he's a player who has a lot of potential for them, and for damn sure I think he's better than bloody DeAndre Jordan, which is the one aspect of this which really does rub me the wrong way most of all, is there's a little bit of favoritism going on there, and I don't like seeing a real promising young center pushed out because of that, or just sort of nudged to the bench at least because of that. But, I mean, if they wanted to trade him, if they decided that was the better option because DeAndre Jordan maybe is going to help them win more immediately, I don't know. I don't think he does, but Kevin Durant might think that because he's mates with the dude. Like, if they wanted to trade Jared Allen, they could get something decent for him. Like, they could certainly bring back some impressive players like the guys. Think of the little arms race there was for Andre Iguodala earlier this season. There'll be someone just like that next season, probably 3 or 4 players. And the Brooklyn Nets will actually be in position to do that. So they can get their 2 or 3 more, like, contributing factor players that can lead them on a playoff run. They can do that now. And Sean Marks gets to be the guy who's, like, pulling those strings. It's a different game for him as general manager, but, I mean, it's not one he's incapable of. In fact, it's probably one he's overqualified now because he's done the hard yards to get to this point. Now he gets to do the fun stuff.
I think, simply put, you're a wee bit more favourable towards the characters of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving than I am.
Yeah, that's probably... I think I'm more favourable than most people towards those two.
Yeah,
especially Durant. I really like Durant. Kyrie, I think, is a
we don't need to
troublesome
explain it. We don't need to explain it. Let's just see how it pans out. That's how you think. This is how I think, and now we just wait to see. Rightio. Aotearoa Warriors, they start their NRL season this weekend, and weird thing for Warriors fans is always assessing expectations, because many people blow up Warriors' expectations and then come with some sort of irrational disappointment when their fantasy expectations were not met, especially in the last 4 to 5 years. What are your expectations for the Warriors from a completely neutral standpoint, Wildcard? We'll move through this quickly. So just what's a baseline for you when you're thinking about the Warriors? Remember that this is kind of year 4 of Stephen Kearney's tenure. They've got a settled squad, no real dramas, building combination, chemistry, consistency, and cohesion are all present. Just having the same group play rugby league. What's a baseline expectation that you think is sensible for the Aotearoa Warriors this season?
That's a tricky one to answer, actually, because I think gut feeling is... I mean, it's like pre-season NRL right now, which means that the annual tradition of Australian pundits picking the Warriors to finish with the wooden spoon is very much in play. Those expectations seem ridiculous to me, but at the same time, like, gut feel is I'm not sure that this is a top 8 team, and I could easily be convinced otherwise to see them playing like consistently and more than anything with a lot, like just keeping their most important players healthy. And that's not something that's happened the last few years, which is always something that feels like it's an underrated aspect, that people just forget about the players that are injured and wonder why this team's so useless when they lose, without acknowledging, like, and this probably, to be honest, goes for every NRL club as well, just the way people talk about the sport. But I could see them doing well for those reasons you just listed, for the, the continuity and all those things and the combinations, but I don't really feel at this point in time, until I'm convinced otherwise, I'm not ready to pick them as a top 8 side.
So my expectation is finals footy. They have, but you're making a prediction. I'm dealing with expectation. The expectation is that this group, after last season, they have to improve, and the conditions for improvement are there. You have people, you've got players who are in their second, third year of combinations. You've got Stephen Kearney, who has spent a lot of time kind of laying the foundations. So in viewing what the Warriors have done over the last 3 years, and I've been quite favourable to them in that time, expressing a desire of patience and understanding that the Warriors have been completely rebuilding Mount Smart over the last 3 to 4 years, and that's not easy to do. I mean, rebuilding as in rebuilding their club, not the physical stadium. So I've been favourable and understanding and patient. Now's the time to start to produce, and to, like, they've had, this summer was always going to be interesting from a development and improvement standpoint. The conditions for improvement are there, and my expectation is that the Warriors make the top 8 based on those improvements, based on having a good group of people and players together for a substantial period of time, which is something that hasn't happened. Whether it's a new coach, whether it's new players and recruiting big players and having different combinations this year, different combinations that year, these conditions have not been present for Warriors, for successful Warriors improvement and footy at any stage over the last few years. So now those conditions are there, my expectations increase, and those expectations are finals footy. Who caught your eye with your Flying Kiwis football this weekend wildcard?
Well, I mean, it's always notable whenever Chris Wood is on the sort of the thumbnail picture for the article that it seems to get a little bit more, a few extra clicks each week. So I guess people do like the star power, and Chris Wood for sure this week deserves a fair bit of a mention here. He scored against Jose Mourinho's Tottenham Hotspur. This is the game I alluded to watching earlier on in the podcast. Just being a good old striker and following up on a shot that was spilt by the keeper. Burnley were absolutely excellent in the first half and should have been more than 1-0 up, to be honest, but they weren't, and then Tottenham made a couple half-time changes. They scored early from a penalty in the second half, which everyone seems to think was a Stonewall penalty. I think it was probably a penalty, and Ben Mee went and sliding like an idiot, so it's his fault regardless, but I didn't think it was as obvious a thing as everyone else, but whatever, maybe I was watching it too early in the morning. Chris Wood then, 2 minutes later, should have had a penalty himself. He went up for a header in the corner of the box, and Davinson Sanchez just came barging straight through him, and no attempt to play the ball, and Woody's up there hands outstretched, what are you up to here, ref? Sean Dyche had a big moan about it afterwards. It ended up as a 1-1 draw, so it's still another good result for Burnley, who keep on their sweet little run of form, but and they're in, for a team that was in relegation trouble 2-3 months ago, there were absolutely no worries. They're closer to pushing for European football the way they're going at the moment. Not playing outstandingly, but just grinding out results every week. And yeah, Chris Wood's a big part of that. This was his 11th goal of the Premier League season. He scored 10 in each of the past 2, so he's hit double figures all 3 seasons he's played for Burnley. 11 obviously means this is a new personal best for him with still a few games to go as well. Let me find the thing here. These are the other players who have scored, and there's still time left in this season for a couple others to join this crew, but these are the players who have scored double figures in each of the last 3 seasons. You got Mohamed Salah, Jamie Vardy, Sergio Aguero, Harry Kane, Raheem Sterling. And as far as I can tell, unless I miss someone, that's all. Those are the cream of the crop in the Premier League, and Chris Wood is on par with these guys. I've seen a few people saying things like, New Zealand public don't realise just how good Chris Wood is. They don't, he doesn't get the credit he deserves. I'm not sure that's true unless you're a person who thinks that the Hellberg Awards are the be-all and end-all of acknowledging Kiwi sports folk. I think most people understand that Chris Wood's a pretty special player and that what he's doing is crazy and impressive and all these things, but always nice to shout out the fella because he's doing bloody well. And just quietly, there's one other aspect to Chris Wood that I like to keep a little eye on, which is that he's a target man striker. He likes to play off the last defender. He likes to hold the ball up. He likes to make little sharp movements, but not big Jamie Vardy runs. He's not particularly fast, and so add all that together and you get a guy who's offside quite a lot. Chris Wood last season was offside more than any other player in the Premier League, and he's looking a pretty good bet to defend that title as well. He's been offside 31 times this season. Callum Wilson is second with 24. Tammy Abraham and Miguel Almiron both have 20. So, it's not even close. He's miles ahead in the offside stakes, and some people would say that as a negative thing. I see that as just another lovely aspect to the Woodsman's game.
If there was going to be a Kiwi striker in the Premier League, you'd hope that they were among the most offside players in the Premier League, wouldn't you?
Yeah, for sure. Especially because, Chris Wood isn't the, unstoppable athlete that some of those other top strikers are. and he's also not a guy like, if you think about watching Harry Kane likes to drop in and pick up the ball and try to pull some more strings, which is always something I get a little frustrated with him, because I just want him hovering around the penalty box scoring goals all the time. But like some of the, like Jamie Vardy is just lightning quick. You look at the dudes at Arsenal, Martial and Rashford at Manchester United, like just really quick, really athletic guys. Chris Wood's athletic prowess is his strength and his height, so it's a different beast, and you got to accept a fair few offsides because of that. But I mean, if Chris Wood's getting offside a lot, I think that's a positive thing, because if he's getting offside a lot, it means that the ball's coming his way a lot. It means that Burnley are trying to feed the beast, let's say.
Feed the beast. I'll make an executive decision here, Wildcard, and we'll just skip that cricket talk. Like, we're moving through this at a rapid rate of knots, and we've got plenty to talk about here with wrapping up UFC 248, which Israel Adesanya, this was his, depending on how you look at it, because he won the interim title bout against Kelvin Gastelum and then defended that bout and won the overall, I think it's middleweight, I'm not too sure off the top of my head. He won the bout against Robert Whittaker. So I view this, like, I just follow what Israel Adesanya says, and he reckons it was his second title defense because he won the bout against Kelvin Gastelum. That's happy days. This was Israel Adesanya's second title defense against Yoel Romero, who, this is a interesting fight to digest because it was a massive, like, non-event. But when you're trying to isolate why this was a non-event, from my perspective, and it'll be interesting to get your perspective, knowing like what you know about fighting sports and pressing the issue, like throwing strikes and moving forward and all that good stuff. Israel Adesanya did nothing wrong. He came out to fight, and Yoel Romero showed absolutely no intention of engaging with Adesanya, which can be viewed as a good tactical decision, because especially the first minute or 2 minutes of any Israel Adesanya fight, he is going to set up his traps. So he's throwing his fakes and feints and legitimate strikes almost with the sole intention of creating a reaction and reading from that reaction. He's not necessarily trying to land strikes. He's just trying to throw stuff and scope out what his opponent is doing, process that information, and store it away and set up more traps and get into the fight. He is kind of like a counter striker, but not really. Like, he has elements of that, but he's also just throwing stuff to process how he can be successful, whether counter striking or whether pressing the issue. So from a Yoel Romero standpoint, the best thing he could do, kinda, was to do nothing. Like, you can see in those opening exchanges, if you can call them that, Adesanya is doing all his like little movements. He's doing all his little twists and moving in and out and side to side. Yoel Romero isn't biting on anything. So he's not giving Adesanya anything to work with. Then Adesanya got caught with a heavy left hand, like an overhand left, which Adesanya said from that point on, and it's easy to see this, it's easy to process this ourselves. If you're gonna engage Yoel Romero when he's not coming to you, you're putting yourself in serious damage and danger, because Yoel Romero, at any stage, he's going to explode, and if he catches you, it might hurt. So Adesanya kind of pressed the issue while Yoel Romero wasn't doing anything, but he quickly decided that wasn't the best way to win this fight. The best way to win this fight was to pick Romero apart from his range and distance as best as he could. So I'm interested to get your thoughts here, Wildcard, having watched the fight, because Adesanya literally did nothing wrong. He won the fight. He dealt with a unique challenge from an opponent. And if you're Yoel Romero, you're coming into a title fight and you're expecting to win by doing nothing. That's not going to happen. However, the joy here is that Adesanya got the win. He found a way to win in crazy circumstances. And when it's like the best teams in in a football or rugby league context, they find a way to win. They win 8-6 on a rainy Saturday night, or on a football they win 1-0, or they hold on to a 1-1 draw. Whatever it is, the best teams, the best athletes, when the situation isn't in their favor, they somehow find a way to win or get a favorable result, and that's what Israel Adesanya did here. So, from my perspective, the way this fight played out, the responsibility for the blame perhaps falls on Romero's shoulders. Adesanya, and then in reviewing the fight, Adesanya showed a completely different way to win his fights, because if we go back to Castellum, that was a 5-round war. If you're going to be a champion, you have to show that you can go 5 rounds in hellish circumstances. He did that. Then he completely outclassed Robert Whittaker. Skills, precision, speed, martial arts at its finest. Come against Romero, and he had to grit his teeth and figure out the conundrum that was that fight, and just somehow claw your way to a victory, which he did. So, to wrap that little rant up, the reason that fight was that way, from my perspective, was because Yoel Romero, Israel Adesanya didn't do anything wrong, and in review, this is good for, this is a good moment for Adesanya to show that he can win different ways, and now he's got a fantastic track record of winning different ways against the best in his division.
Which is always a important feather to have in your bow if you want to be not just a champion but a sustained champion, and I think that's probably something just quietly that Joseph Parker was not able to do. Before I add in my own 2 cents here, just to classify some things, and I'm sure there's probably be a few people listening who would also be interested, because the scoring in UFC is the same as boxing, right? Where it's 10 points for winning the round, 9 points for being the next guy, and I assume, drop points for, I don't know. In boxing, you also would then lose an additional point for either referee penalties, so hitting below the belt or something, or dirty play, or you lose a point as well for getting knocked down. I'm pretty sure that's the same in UFC. I'm not sure about knockdowns and whatever, but how do they actually score it? Is it just straight whoever has the most clean strikes is the one who is awarded the round kind of thing for the judges?
There are people who are far more embedded in UFC and MMA than myself who this is a contentious point of discussion. So,
right,
it's I would prefer just to have no clue, and because everyone tries to figure out the scoring, it's octagon control, it's whether, because if you take someone down and that takedown doesn't actually lead to damage or lead to a submission, do you score points for the takedown? And so it's an absolute shit show, to be honest, wildcard. And when stuff is an absolute shit show, my preference is always just to ignore the shit show and cop whatever happens. And unfortunately for the athletes, it's a shit show. But in trying to, it's an absolute nightmare trying to explain, because some people did view Romero as winning that fight because when he did strike, he landed and he caused a bit of damage, so, but then it's what value do you place on leg kicks? Because Adesanya absolutely destroyed Yoel Romero's front leg with kicks to the outside, kicks to the inside. That's what he was doing when he was picking apart after he made the adjustment. He just started kicking the fuck out of Romero's leg. So what value do you place on kicks? And it's a nightmare. It's a shit show. So I've got no idea, straight up. But that's when you just rely on your eye. If you're trying to assess the fight, which I don't really tend to do. I just try and enjoy, and then whoever wins, whatever.
Yeah, so that's sort of effectively what I was bleeding to as well. So, because if you're, I don't know, it's to watch a a boxing fight, it's pretty easy to, not easy, but it's definitely easier because you're just watching the gloves, you're seeing who's hitting who, like you can tell a clean punch. But then with this fight, I was definitely like in that same boat of even not even the same boat. I was further out at sea. Like, I don't really know what's going on here. Is like that one big heavy left that Adesanya copped in the first round, and there were once or twice where he sort of got roughed up, where he got a little bit too close in I think the second, maybe even once in the third. After that, it did seem like he was more in control, and the commentators seemed to think he was ahead and winning sort of thing. But I didn't. I mean, I had the sound off for most of the time, so I wasn't hardly listening to them anyway, because I was trying to. I was like, my main focus was on the Phoenix game, just in case they scored a goal at the time. But I'm pretty experienced at following multiple sports at once on double screening and even triple screening sometimes. I don't mean to brag, but sign of the times. So I didn't know if he was winning or not. I couldn't tell, and that thing about the leg kicks was the main one. I'm like, so if you're scoring equal like value to that, this is exactly what I was thinking at the time. Like, if you're putting equal value on that as you are to everything else, it just seems so easy for Adesanya. It seemed like he must have been cruising because he was just popping the fella over. Like, do you see the dude's leg? Romero's leg afterwards was wrecked. Like, that's just because Adesanya has just been hacking at it all day. And that, like, if that is on an equal par, then it seemed like he must have cruised, but I didn't know if that would be the case or not. I didn't know if that was going to get the same whatever. Like, it's just... Yeah, it was a tricky one to watch because I had no idea how they were going to call it afterwards, because I had no idea how they were scoring it during it. But it seems like, even Romero afterwards, he wasn't doing the standard boxing thing of being like, judges screwed me here, I should have won. He was just like, why wasn't he more aggressive? And I can understand that, because it seemed like that was his plan, was that he wanted to be the a counter-attacking guy, of just draw Adesanya in and then destroy him. And so from that point of view, it seemed like Adesanya did exactly what he needed to do by just just touching him up from a distance and not overcommitting and not putting himself in danger and not getting into those like real tricky highlight reel type situations. So, I mean, it seemed from that, given the result and given how the conversation has been about the fight afterwards, it seems like Adesanya just did exactly what he needed to do, and perfectly. And it's weird, the general kind of like this, like the narrative of what a terrible fight this was, and the title fight didn't live up to expectations. And you've even got old mate Dana saying this, and you've got like fighters acknowledging it, and like it's just, I don't know, it's a little strange one, which is, I guess, because of that whole UFC like bubble that it has, because it is a self-contained thing. You don't get so many rival political kind of aspects to it. Everyone's just a little more honest and open about things, which is refreshing and also just weird. So it's kind of a strange mix of those. But yeah, it was definitely an experience to catch that one.
Yeah, there's all sorts of weeds that we could get into there. And I actually think back to Dan Hooker's recent fight against Paul Felder, which was very, very, very even. But late in the fight, Dan Hooker had a takedown, which could have been viewed by some people as skewing the fight in Dan Hooker's favor. But the takedown, you're getting into like... One thing I've actually been pondering, like, we don't need to talk about this here, maybe this is a good one for the Patreon, but the gray area of sports where like you have like baseball has all of these where stuff isn't illegal, but it's frowned upon, like cricket has it with the Mankad and all sorts of other things. There's stuff like this where you've got like theories and ideas that may be true but aren't actually factually true, and that is very evident in MMA, where it's like if you're in a title fight, you can only use your in this situation, Romero needed to go out and win the bout. You don't win the bout by shelling up and doing nothing. So it's all, sports is full of all sorts of gray areas, and also like little myths and theories that seep their way into truth but aren't actually true. It's a very weird equation there, Wildcard.
Let's for sure pencil that down for a Patreon podcast, though, because we could go in some areas there.
Yes. As far as offering insight and value as to what we learned about Israel Adesanya. It was the fact that he got the win in niggly circumstance, which is great for him. He now fights Paulo Costa, and a lot of the noise after this fight is that Paulo Costa's someone like Paulo Costa defeated Yoel Romero and did so in brutal fashion. That was a great fight because Paulo Costa he's going to go at Adesanya. And so that's just going to be an exciting fight. So Adesanya can quickly transition into looking forward to that fight. Another little thing here is that we saw more of Israel Adesanya's takedown defense. There were a couple instances where Romero did try to take down Adesanya. One stands to mind where Adesanya, and this is an Olympic level wrestler trying to take down Adesanya. I'm not 3,000% sure that these takedowns were like super intense, because Yoel Romero was like all over the show. He was just acting weird throughout the whole fight. So I don't know what he was up to, but like I've seen this throughout Adesanya's career where he is very difficult to take down. So if you're a striker and you have an excellent takedown defense, which can come in the form of like dropping your hips to the mat, getting your legs back, so your opponent can't grab onto your legs and there's not much leverage there. Romero lunged forward with like a flurry attack at Adesanya at various points, and this is where it looked like Adesanya was running, because he was literally running away from Romero because he was getting backed up against the cage. But the point is that Adesanya escaped those attempts. He escaped those flurries, and then he nullified any takedown attempts. And when you're dealing with a striker of Adesanya's quality, to have that takedown defense, like his coming up through the UFC, he was fighting wrestlers. Marvin Vettori, Brad Tavares, Robert Whittaker was a Commonwealth Games qualified wrestler himself. Derek Brunson, bit of a wrestler as well. So he has consistently shown throughout his UFC career the ability to deal with those guys who are going to throw takedowns at him, and that was reinforced against Yoel Romero, which is a low-key thing, because shout out to the City Kickboxing guys that were in his corner. You had Eugene Behrman, Mike Angrove, you had Andre Paulette and Tristram Apakatoa, I think, who is otherwise known as Twist. But the City Kickboxing has a reputation for striking, but I've seen consistently with Adesanya, and then you look at other City Kickboxing fighters like Brad Riddell, Kaikata France, Dan Hooker, they all have really good wrestling. They all have really good defensive strategies to deal with guys taking them down, and they're going to be eager to, in the right circumstances. Dan Hooker had a good takedown against Paul Felder, so they can attack with their grappling as well. So for Kiwi sports fans, like, City Kickboxing is breeding fighters who are extremely well-rounded. They have an international reputation of breaking boundaries with their striking, with feints, with switching stances and punches, elbows, kicks. Like, the whole smorgasbord of their striking is brilliant. However, beneath that radar, as I've seen with Adesanya throughout his whole UFC career, and now more recently against the best in the division, City Kickboxing is producing well-rounded MMA fighters who can deal with those fighters who might want to take them down, might want to wrestle, and execute some jiu-jitsu with them as well. So it's an undercover tick for City Kickboxing with how they develop extremely well-rounded fighters. And just the last note on that, so Andre Paulette is I think he was like a Commonwealth Games wrestler for New Zealand. I think he's French maybe, or this is terrible, I should know. He's part of the New Zealand Olympic wrestling team, freestyle wrestling, which is good for him. He went to the Delhi Commonwealth Games. But they also have a guy, there's the Hickman brothers, who are coaches at Tiger Muay Thai in Thailand, and through long relationships with guys like Dan Hooker, Brad Riddell, Kai Kara France, who have gone to Thailand to train, within the last 10 years. That's been a constant relationship. But now I've been watching a lot of content, and one of the Hickman brothers, I think Frank Hickman, has been spending a lot of time at City Kickboxing, and he's a very good wrestling coach as well. So I think big shout out to Andre Paulette and the Hickman brothers for helping City Kickboxing build these well-rounded fighters.
Yeah, I did actually jot down. I was going to ask you about Adesanya's defense and how it's sort of acknowledged, because it seemed to me, just as an amateur watching on, that was, particularly in the last couple rounds, kind of a defining factor, was just how elusive he seemed in those moments. And yeah, you've already answered that question. The only other thing I was going to say is that this sort of, I guess it kind of crosses over with those sort of gentlemanly conduct and myths and routines and stuff and sports, which is that idea about how and this is the thing that people have said the most to defend Adesanya based on the quality of the fight, was that it's not his job to, as the champion, it's not his job to be the guy dictating things. That's the challenger's job, is to fight on the front foot and all those, which I don't know, I just struggle with the idea of that. I understand it from a literal perspective, because obviously the challenger is the one who has to come out and win the belt, rather than the guy who's just defending it. When you just think about the logic of those two, just the wording used there, winning versus defending, it's clearly a different perspective. But I mean, I think a lot of people are just, sometimes fights aren't that interesting, especially title fights. Sometimes grand finals in other sports just aren't that interesting. Sometimes, whatever, sport in general, sometimes it just peters out to a little draw, or maybe the entertainment value isn't of the same level, and that's just the way it goes. Sometimes you just get a fight like this, which is more what I was thinking. I don't really understand why anyone needs to defend Adesanya or criticize Romero. I mean, you criticize Romero because he lost. That's why you don't criticize him for the entertainment value of the fight necessarily, because the only reason that was a problem is because he didn't win. And that's where the criticism comes. The result, purely. How you got to that result only matters with that, hindsight vision of the approach and whatever and how it played out. But I don't think Adesanya needs criticism for the way of the fight. I don't think Romero does. Don't think either of them need to be defended for their tactics either. It's just kind of fascinating how two different fighters always address things, and sometimes the tactical battle is more than the physical battle, and that just is that's just the nature of sport in general. And if sometimes you don't get, as a fan, the most entertaining fight that you expected, well, tough tits. That's kind of the way it goes.
Tough titties indeed. The final thing here is just for starters, Adesanya's he did an interview with Ariel Helwani just prior to us recording this, and just hearing him be vulnerable, hearing him express his emotions, and he is an inspiration for young Kiwis. And young people around the world. The way he goes about his work people should take inspiration from the way he speaks, from what he speaks about, to the person that he is. And there was I just settled on a nice little split here. He had an entrance, a walkout, which was very his previous against Rob Whittaker. He came out with his friends from either Rotorua or Wanganui, and he did a dance routine with them, and that was great. And then he smoked Robert Whittaker. This fight, there was a Nigerian focus to his entrance, which was beautiful. Israel Adesanya isn't just one of the top 3 UFC stars in the whole world at the moment. He is also he is the king of the walkout in the UFC, which needs to be highlighted. But the way he won that fight, to me, it resonated with me as a Kiwi. That's what Kiwis do. it just felt like a naturally Kiwi scenario when you're coming up against someone who has a bit more flair. They've got a bit more, and you can say Latino because the way Yoel Romero from Cuba, Central America, but there's a Latino element, the passion and the just the slightly unpredictable nature of their actions. That's not really a Kiwi way of operating, which I think is very understandable and clear for listeners to, like, there's a very large, as someone who lived in Chile, there's a very large disparity between how Kiwis operate and how people from South America and Central America operate. It was evident in Israel Adesanya dealing with adversity, dealing with a crazy scenario, and he just did what was required to win. And Kiwis around the world are reliable for getting the job done. That's what we do. That's how we operate. You go anywhere around the world where Kiwis have worked over a long period of time, and Kiwis get the job done. It's the Kiwi ingenuity. It's the Kiwi DIY nature. We get the job done. We can be trusted to get the job done. We can be relied on to get the job done. Whatever you need, whatever scenario you throw, we adapt and we get the job done without any fuss. And ultimately, to me, that's what resonated with Israel Adesanya in this fight. That was the joy of the fight. Was from an entertainment standpoint, there wasn't much action, but from an entertainment and viewing experience from someone living in Aotearoa, born and raised in Aotearoa, it was watching a Kiwi deal with that unique little weird scenario and still get the job done. It was a beautiful thing.
Who would you have higher on the walkout, ultimate worldwide walkout rankings between Israel Adesanya versus Tyson Fury coming out wearing a crown on his head with a cape, literally being carried on a throne?
On the basis of boxing being far more familiar with those type of walkouts, I'll say Israel Adesanya, because Israel Adesanya, like, there's been other UFC fighters who have put a lot of effort and intention with their walkouts, but Israel Adesanya, in the space of 2 years, has kind of changed that paradigm already. Whereas the Tyson Fury walkout came with the Deontay Wilder walkout, and it's like,
which Deontay Wilder then blamed for losing.
Yeah, at that level of heavyweight boxing and that level of boxing, I don't know, maybe the heavyweights just have a bit more pizzazz and a bit more personality. I feel like it's to be expected. And you had two fighters doing a similar thing in the same fight. No one's going to match Israel Adesanya in the walkout stakes coming up against him. And I think he has shifted. Like, again, throughout the UFC, there's been interesting walkouts, but especially recently, it kind of just settled into a stock standard kind of bracket. And the UFC are to blame because they are quite restrictive of the walkout process. But there's no one else doing what Adesanya does. And yeah, I think in boxing it's far more accepted and widespread. So I'm going to go with Adesanya.
Yeah, I've never seen anything near as extravagant as that Fury-Wilder fight with the two walkouts. I mean, I can think of Anthony Joshua when he fought Joseph Parker, and I think that was that at Wembley or in Cardiff? I can't remember. It was at a big football stadium, and he came out and they lifted him up onto like a platform so that he could stand in front of the crowd like 10 feet off the ground, and it was pretty wanky. But obviously the Deontay Wilder walkout was ridiculous. He's famous for his masks, but he took that one a little bit too far and then moaned about it afterwards. You don't often see the big extravagant walkouts as often as you'd think. It tends to just be a title fight thing, and at that point I think you've earned that right to do whatever you want. Normally it's just people talk about the song they walk out to. Joseph Parker's always got quite a cool, he's got his like cultural procession type thing that he does with a lot of his family and followers and stuff walking out with him, and that is always quite cool. What I like about that is that it's very Joseph Parker, and I think that's why, I'm going with Izzy as well versus Tyson Fury, but what I love about Joseph Parker's one, as I was just saying, but then especially to Adesanya and Tyson Fury, what I love about their two like the extravagances of their walkouts is that it's so reflective of them. Like it's their personalities just not even unleashed, because they're two guys who you couldn't put them in a box if you tried. But like it's so reflective of who they are, and I think that's exactly what you want. If you're going to go the big 9 yards, like, you don't have to. There's nothing wrong with just walking out casually to a good tune and then just like, you know, clicking your neck a few times, punching your fists together and getting ready to go. You know, there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But if you are going to go the full 9 yards, that's what you want, is something that really like tells a story.
And most importantly, authenticity. Whatever you're doing has to be authentic to you and who you are. So, bit of authenticity never hurt nobody. We'll wrap it up there, wildcard, and we'll be back later in the week on Thursday for another episode. Cricketing matters will be at the forefront, and we'll be looking forward to a first round of NRL. There'll be another. Who are the Wellington Phoenix playing next week, wildcard?
They have got they're home to Melbourne Victory. I can't remember which day, and then on Wednesday night they've got a midweek game against Sydney, which is a little bit of an awkward one. That one's away in Sydney, so yeah, tough week coming up. But also could be, you know, this thing about a tough week is that tough week can make or break you. So in particular for the Phoenix, let's say could be a massive. They can take 4 points from these two games. They're in a great place.
So we'll have a little gaze at that as well. Kia kaha, stay beautiful, keep smiling, stay positive, and just, you might as well just shut off the outside world at this stage. Like, so much bullshit going around. Just focus on yourself, go within, raise your mana up, chit.